Welcome to Gemara Academy. In this class, we will learn Tosfos Dibra Maschel Toicha Pesach Afal Pishain Beidalid Tzorich Lechi Acher Lahatiri. Let's begin by looking at the flowchart of the Gemara so we can see what Tosfos is coming to explain. So here in the Gemara, we had a question on Acherim that said in the Brisa that when the door is open, the doorstep is like the inside. The doorstep is a Rishus HaYachid. And the Gemara asked that we know that the doorstep could only be treated like a Rishus HaYachid if it has another lechi on the outside of it. It needs another lechi. It requires a lechi on the outside of the doorstep in order to treat it like a Rishus HaYachid, in order to treat it like the inside. And the Gemara supported its question by continuing and saying that even if the doorstep is less than 4 tefachim wide, it still requires another lechi. So how can the Acherim say when the door is open, the doorstep is like the inside, if we find that in any case the doorstep can never be treated like the inside unless it has another lechi on the outside of it to permit treating it like a Rishus HaYachid. So this is the part of the Gemara that Tosfos is coming to talk about and explain. And let's see the general outline of Tosfos. So the Gemara asks that even when the doorstep is less than 4 by 4 tefachim wide, it should require another lechi to carry there. So there are two parts to Tosfos. Number one, Tosfos will ask why the Gemara didn't answer this question in a more simple way. Tosfos looks at the question and says that it seems that there's a very simple way of answering this question, much more simple than the answers from Rav Yehuda Amar Rav and from Rav Ashi. And number two, the second part of Tosfos is Tosfos will address a question on his answer. So the second part is just a continuation, which is Tosfos will support his answer by addressing a question. So the whole Tosfos consists of a question, an answer, and then a support to the answer. And let's see Tosfos now in the flowchart form. So the Gemara asked that the doorstep needs a second lechi to carry on it, even if it's not 4 tefachim wide. So Tosfos asks on this question, and if one asks, V'im Taimer, and before we get to the question, we'll just point out that the ideas that are presented here, there's a lot of information attached to them. They're very complicated and difficult. And we're going to stay very focused on exactly what Tosfos presents so that we can understand our Gemara. So what's relevant to our Gemara and what Tosfos brings up, that's all we're going to look at. So the question is, according to Rava, that this is only true when it's open to a Carmelis because of Matzah Minas Minavineir. Let's say here it's open to Rishus HaRabim. Tosfos asks, and he's going to complete the question a little later on. The question is, according to Rava, we only say that when the doorstep is less than 4 tefachim wide, it requires another lechi if the doorstep is open to a carmelis, because then we say matzah minas minay vener, which means one thing finds its similar thing and it awakens it in those qualities. So the doorstep, if it's next to a carmelis, we're going to say since the doorstep is really at this point a makim p'tur, because it's less than 3 tefachim wide, it really should be a makim p'tur. However, since it's exposed to a carmelis, and the Mokim Torah is similar in this sense to a Carmelis, it'll also get the rule of a Carmelis, and it'll be necessary for there to be another Lechi in order to permit carrying there and treating it like a Rishus HaYachid. However, Rava says that if this doorstep that's less than 4 tefachim wide is open to a Rishus HaRabim, then this doorstep is a regular Mokim Torah, and it does not require a Lechi on the outside of it to permit carrying there. So why don't we simply answer that it's referring to a doorstep, according to Rav, that's open to Rishus HaRabim, and then it doesn't need another lechi to permit carrying there if it's less than 4 tefachim wide. And Tosfos continues in his question and says, and even according to Abaya, that doesn't distinguish between when it's open to a carmelis and when it's open to a Rishus HaRabim. Abaya says in any case, if it's open to a carmelis or Rishus HaRabim, it needs a lechi on the outside of it to permit carrying there. It says Tosfos, let's say here it's 3 tefachim high. We could simply answer that this doorstep, which is less than 4 tefachim wide, is 3 tefachim high, because then Abaya agrees that it doesn't require another lechi on the outside of it to permit carrying there, since it's a makim p'tor that doesn't need a lechi. And Tosfos now supports this by bringing the information from Eruvin to support what we just said about Abaya. From the first parak of Eruvin, he holds, referring to Abaya, that it only needs another lechi if the doorstep is not 3 tefachim high, or if there's no doorstep at all. If there's no actual elevation to the doorstep, or it's less than 3 tefachim, then Abaya says it requires a lechi because it seems to be part of the rishus outside of it, whether it's a carmelis or Rishus HaRabim, it requires another lechi. However, if the doorstep is 3 tefachim high, or higher than that, then it's clearly removed from the Rishus HaRabim. Since it's less than 4 tefachim wide, this is a makim p'tur. And Abaya says that in such a case, it doesn't require another lechi. So Tosfos now leads into the question, and that is, so why does Rav force a different answer? So Tosfos brings the question from Rav and Abaye. He brings the background information, which supports what he said about Abaye, and then leads into the question, which is, so why does Rav, because we brought an answer from Yehuda Amar Rav, that's our first answer, why does Rav force a different answer that we're referring to a maveh that became kosher with a kaira, and it only covered part of the doorstep, and when we say it's like the inside, it's only the area under the beam? Why can't we just give a very simple answer? According to Rava, it's a doorstep that's open to a Rishus Harabim, and the doorstep is less than 4 tefachim wide. And according to Abaye, it's a doorstep that's 3 tefachim high, and it's less than 4 tefachim wide. In those cases, it doesn't require another lechi, since it's a makom ptur. There's no need for another lechi there to permit carrying on it. So why doesn't the Gemara just give this simple answer? And Tosfos answers the question by saying, we couldn't say this because then even when it's locked, it's like the inside. If this doorstep is less than 4 tefachim wide, and according to a Rava, it's exposed to Rishus Harabim, and according to Abaye, it's 3 tefachim high, this doorstep is a makom ptur. It's always going to be like the inside, like we said in the previous Tosfos, and it's always going to be like the outside. It won't matter if the door is open or locked. So the problem with answering that it's less than 4 tefachim wide, and it's in such a manner that it doesn't need a lechi on the outside of it to be carrying on it, the problem would be that that's only true by a makom ptur. And a makom ptur is not going to be like the inside only when the door is open. It'll also be like the inside when the door is locked. So that won't answer our question that we have on Acherim, that what doorstep are they talking about? It should need another lechi. By answering, it's a doorstep that doesn't need another lechi, well, that's a doorstep that's always like the inside. Acherim are referring to a doorstep that when the door is open, it's like the inside. When the door is locked, it's like the outside. So just to bring out the answer of Tosfos is that if we would answer that it's referring to a doorstep that doesn't need another lechi, that's a doorstep that wouldn't fit into the case of Acherim. And that's why we didn't answer it. And Tosfos now addresses a question on his answer, and it could also be looked at just as additional information. We're presenting it here as addressing a question. So why didn't the Gemara say that if it's less than 4 by 4, it's always like the inside? Why didn't the Gemara say that it should require another lechi? And if it's less than 4 tefachim wide, then it won't fit in Acherim because it's always like the inside. Why did we say if it's less than 4 tefachim wide, it still needs another lechi? Tosfos answers, the Gemara could have said that. And when the Gemara said, if you say it's not 4 tefachim wide, he could have asked, if so, even when it's locked, it should also be so. It should also be mutter to carry from it to the Rishus HaYachid. The Gemara could have said that. The Gemara could have said one of two things. When it's 4 tefachim wide, it needs another lechi. And if you tell me it's not 4 tefachim wide, the Gemara could have said one of two things. Either then it also needs a lechi. For example, according to Rav, if it's open to a carmelis, and according to Abaye, if it's less than 3 tefachim high, it would still require another lechi. Or the Gemara could have said, and if it's not 4 tefachim wide, it won't fit into Acherim, because then it's always like the inside, even when the door is locked. Since it's a makom ptur, the Gemara could have said either one, and the Gemara chose one of them. So to summarize the Tosfos, what comes out over here is that when it's less than 4 tefachim wide, it won't fit with Acherim, and it'll be a problem fitting with the din of Acherim, because if it's less than 4 tefachim wide, it's one of two things. Either it still will require a lechi, or it won't be affected by whether the door is open or locked, and in Acherim's case, they don't have another lechi, and it is affected by whether the door is open or locked, and therefore, these cases will not be able to fit with the teaching of Acherim. So just to summarize the flow of Tosfos, Tosfos asked the question, why can't we simply answer it's a case where it doesn't need a lechi? Because we have such cases both according to Rava and according to Abaye. And Tosfos answered that even if it won't need another lechi, it still wouldn't fit with Acherim, because then it's a case of a makom ptur, which is always like the inside, and it's always like the outside, and therefore it doesn't fit into the teaching of Acherim that distinguish that at times it's like the inside, and at times it's like the outside. So it comes out that there's two parts to Tosfos. Number one, Tosfos has a question on the Gemara itself. The Gemara says that we have a question on Acherim, and Tosfos says it seems that we have an answer. Why didn't the Gemara give this answer? And Tosfos explains why it's not an answer. So now we see why the Gemara didn't present it, since it's not an answer. The second part of Tosfos is, we see that it's not an answer, but why didn't the Gemara go through this process? Why did the Gemara show this point why it's not an answer? Why did it take a different route? And Tosfos says the Gemara could have taken that route. It could have brought at that point. It just happened to bring out an alternative point, but both of them are valid.